What happens when the man who built a hotel empire ends up scrubbing toilets in one of his own rooms? Franklin Hayes stood in the back of a supply closet, tying the strings of a faded gray apron over a corporate polo he'd never worn until today. The mirror stuck to the inside of the door showed a man with a buzzed haircut, fake glasses, and a little extra weight added to his cheeks with makeup. He looked nothing like the polished CEO who usually wore tailored suits and shook hands with investors across a mahogany desk. He took a breath and stepped out. 6 hotels. That's what he owned now. What began 15 years ago with a rundown 2-floor motel in Missouri had grown into a modest chain that stretched across 3 states. But lately, things felt off. Guest complaints were rising. Reviews mentioned dirty hallways, rude staff, and long waits for basic service. His district manager, Tasha, gave him the usual reasons: staffing shortages, high turnover, inflation. But Franklin couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut, so he decided to see it for himself. He picked the 3rd location just outside Indianapolis. Medium-sized, 60 rooms, mostly business travelers. He'd never personally met the staff. Most of them were hired by local management. His disguise: a transfer trainee named Rick helping out due to short staffing. No one questioned it. Corporate sent floaters all the time now. His first morning started in the housekeeping break room. Small, windowless, and filled with the smell of instant coffee and old cleaning chemicals. "New guy?" a woman asked, eyeing him over her mug. "Yeah, Rick." "They sent me from the Evansville location." "Briella," she said, extending a hand. "You'll be with me today." She was in her late 20s, Hispanic, wore cheap sneakers, and had a tight ponytail that looked like it had been redone in a car mirror. She didn't smile much, but her voice had a softness to it. Tired, but kind. They cleaned 10 rooms by noon. Franklin kept pace, but just barely. His arms ached and sweat ran down his back. Briella moved with robotic precision: strip beds, scrubbed toilets, wiped down counters. She didn't talk unless spoken to. "You ever get breaks around here?" Franklin asked as they finished another room. Briella chuckled dryly. 15 minutes, but only if we're ahead, which we're not." She rubbed her lower back before heading into the next room. Lunch came late. They sat on the floor near the vending machines, eating from plastic containers. Franklin noticed her grimace as she sat down. "You all right?" he asked. "Just pulled something last week. Manager said I could take a day, but then reminded me about my hours. Said if I don't hit 30 this week, I lose my health benefits." Franklin froze. "Wait, you're still working with back pain?" She looked at him like he'd just asked her if water was wet. "You think I can afford to call off? I've got a 6-year-old and my rent went up again." "I asked to switch to lighter-duty laundry or front desk. Manager said we're short and I'm needed upstairs." She winced as she stood. "So here I am." Franklin's stomach twisted. He followed her to the next room, but his hands moved slower now. His mind wasn't on the sheets anymore. The manager, a tall man named Darren, met them in the hallway later that afternoon. His blazer looked new, and he wore a Bluetooth earpiece like he was constantly mid-call. "Briella, you're behind," he snapped. "You were supposed to have 15 rooms done by now." "We're almost there," she said, standing straighter despite the pain clearly etched into her face. "Almost isn't done. Pick it up. And Rick," he turned to Franklin, "you're not here to learn slowly. This isn't a daycare. Keep up or go home." Franklin clenched his jaw but nodded. Darren turned and walked away without another word. Later, in the laundry room, Franklin watched Briella quietly fold towels while occasionally pressing a hand to her back. "You ever think about quitting?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Every day." He didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, he met more of the staff. There was Tanya, an older woman who ran laundry and practically lived in the basement. Lionel, a college kid working front desk at night. Both were friendly and both seemed overworked. Darren barked orders like a drill sergeant, rarely saying thank you. Franklin realized something else too: everyone was afraid to speak up. They whispered in corners, avoided eye contact when Darren passed, and smiled too wide when he was near. On day 3, something broke. Briella dropped a vacuum in the hallway, grabbing her back with a sharp cry. Darren appeared within seconds. "What now?" I can't move right," she said, trying to steady herself. "You've got 4 more rooms." "I need to sit just a few minutes." "You're not sitting," Darren snapped. "If you can walk, you can clean. We all have problems. You want hours or not?" Franklin's stomach dropped. He looked at Briella, who was trembling. That's when he stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "I think she needs to go home." Darren turned. "Who the hell are you to decide that?" Franklin took a breath, his stomach tight. "Actually," he said, "I own this place." Darren's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Franklin's jaw flexed, but his voice held steady. "I said I own this property. My name is Franklin Hayes. I founded Hayes Hospitality Group, which this hotel is a part of." Briella's expression shifted instantly from shock to confusion to something unreadable. The hallway had gone quiet. A cart down near the elevator stopped moving. Sheets hung half-folded in the air. Darren gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Right, and I'm the governor of Indiana." Franklin reached into the side pocket of his khakis and pulled out his corporate badge. The lacquered metal logo reflected the fluorescent lighting. Darren took one look, and the color drained from his face. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Franklin said. "Is this how you speak to your team?" There was a long pause before Darren replied, his voice tight. "I wasn't aware. I'm not asking whether you knew who I was. I'm asking if this is how you normally treat people when you think no one's watching." Darren's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced toward Briella, who had now backed against the wall, hands still on her waist, her breathing shallow. "Go sit down," Franklin said to her, his voice softer. "Now. We'll get someone else on the rooms." She nodded once, then carefully walked toward the elevator, each step deliberate. Franklin didn't speak again until she was out of sight. "Office," he said, turning back to Darren. They walked in silence. On the way, a few employees glanced up from their stations. Word was already spreading. Franklin could feel the ripple in the air: curiosity, fear, maybe even hope. The office was cramped, walls lined with whiteboards and shift calendars. Darren closed the door behind them. "You want to explain that behavior?" Franklin asked, folding his arms. Darren hesitated. "Look, this location is under constant pressure. We're understaffed. Housekeeping's down by almost 40%. If I give out breaks every time someone says they're tired," she wasn't tired. She was injured. She didn't file an incident report. She said she pulled something last week, and she still showed up. "I assumed she was fine." "You assumed wrong." Franklin's tone sharpened. "And even if she hadn't said a word, your response to pain shouldn't be get back to work or lose your hours." Darren raised his voice slightly. "I'm trying to hold this place together. You want numbers? I've cut overtime, I've kept labor under budget, and I've increased occupancy. You think that happens by letting people coast?" "Coast?" Franklin's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "You think that woman was coasting?" Darren looked away. Franklin stepped forward. "You don't yell at injured staff. You don't threaten their livelihood. And you don't treat people like they're disposable." There was no response. "You're relieved of your position effective immediately." Darren blinked. "You're firing me?" Franklin didn't flinch. "Yes, I'll arrange for your exit paperwork today. You'll be escorted out after you pack your office." Darren's face flushed red. He didn't speak, just nodded stiffly and pulled open the door. Franklin stayed behind, staring at the whiteboard. Every line on it was a shift. Every name was someone he hadn't met until this week. He'd been running numbers, not lives. He made his way back to the break room. Briella was sitting in a plastic chair, a cold bottle of water pressed to her lower back. Tanya from laundry stood nearby, arms crossed. "I'm sorry," Briella said quietly as he stepped in. "You don't need to apologize," Franklin replied. "You shouldn't have been put in that position." Tanya looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "So it's really true? You're the one who started all this?" "Yes." "Then you should know," she said. "This place has been running on fumes for months." Franklin nodded. "I want to hear everything. But first, Briella, do you need to go home?" She hesitated. "I'll be okay, I just need a day off." "Maybe 2. I'll make sure you're fully paid for the days you miss, and we'll get you checked out by a doctor. Company covers the visit." Her eyes widened. "Seriously?" Franklin nodded. "You're not just a line item, you're a person. And you've earned better than this." She looked away, blinking fast. "I need to speak to everyone," he said. They gathered the staff in the small employee lounge front desk, laundry, maintenance, housekeeping. A few part-timers couldn't make it, but most of the core team stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed or hands tucked into apron pockets. Tension pulsed in the air. Franklin stood at the front, no longer in disguise, his real voice carrying through the cramped room. "I came here because I stopped trusting the reports I was getting. What I found was worse than I imagined." No one spoke. "You've been overworked, overlooked, and in some cases mistreated. That ends now. The manager responsible has been removed. Effective immediately, I'm assigning a temporary GM from our corporate team. Her name is Elaine. She'll be here tomorrow." Still no reaction, though a few exchanged glances. "I'm not promising miracles overnight, but I am promising this. No one here is going to be punished for speaking up. If you're hurt, you'll be heard. If you're exhausted, we'll listen. And if you've been carrying more than your share without recognition, we're going to change that." A hand went up. Lionel, the night shift desk worker. "You gonna hire more people? Because we're drowning." "Yes," Franklin said. "We're authorizing emergency hiring for at least 6 new positions, and overtime will be approved as needed until we're fully staffed." Tanya spoke next. "What about the equipment? Our washers break down twice a week. We've been air drying sheets in the hallway. I'll have new machines delivered within the week, and we'll reimburse you for any out-of-pocket you've used to keep things running." A pause. Then Briella, from her seat in the corner, "Why now? Why'd it take you coming here like this to see it?" Franklin looked at her, then at the rest of the room. "Because I stopped showing up. I thought numbers on a spreadsheet were enough to tell the truth. They weren't, and that's on me." The silence was heavier now, not angry, just real. "I can't change what's already happened, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again, starting with this building." He didn't expect applause, and he didn't get it, but he did see something shift in their eyes. Later that afternoon, Franklin sat in the back office with a legal pad, going over handwritten notes from his time undercover. He wasn't planning to turn this into a press piece or a corporate video. This wasn't for branding. This was for accountability. One by one, he called in staff members. Not just to talk about complaints, but to ask what they needed to do their jobs well, not better. Well, Briella asked for back support harnesses and a more consistent room assignment so she wasn't climbing stairs with equipment. Tanya asked for a part-time assistant during peak days. Lionel asked for a second overnight clerk on weekends, so he wasn't handling every guest alone. None of the requests were unreasonable. Franklin approved everyone. By the time the sun set, the building felt different. Not fixed, but different. The kind of different that comes when someone finally listens. Franklin stepped outside into the cooling dusk, watching the last of the guests trickle in. The automatic doors hissed behind him. He didn't feel like a CEO tonight. He felt like someone who'd just woken up. And he wasn't going back to sleep. Franklin arrived early the next morning, wearing his regular clothes for the first time since stepping into the hotel. A navy button-down and slate gray slacks, clean, pressed, and vastly different from the worn uniform he'd spent the last few days in. Elaine, the interim general manager flown in from corporate, was already in the back office, reviewing the personnel files. She was in her 40s, direct but grounded, with a quiet intensity that didn't need volume to command respect. "Staff's uneasy," she said as he stepped in. "Not because of the changes, because they don't believe it'll last." "They've earned the right to be skeptical," Franklin replied. Elaine glanced up. "You planning to stay here long as it takes," he said. "I'm not disappearing after one visit." She nodded once and returned to the files. "We'll start performance interviews tomorrow. I want to know who's pulling their weight and who's not." Franklin stepped out and made his way to the break room. The space was quieter than usual, but people nodded when they saw him. No one avoided his gaze. That was new. He found Briella near the vending machine, her apron folded over her arm. She was in jeans and a sweater, clearly off duty. "You didn't have to come in," Franklin said. "I know." "I wanted to." He studied her face. She looked less tense but not at ease. "How's your back?" "Still tight," she replied. "Doctor gave me a muscle relaxer and told me to rest, but I wanted to talk to you before the schedule changes again." He gestured toward the hallway. "Walk with me." They stepped into the quiet corridor by the side entrance, away from guest traffic. The walls were scuffed. The carpet had a faint bleach stain near the exit. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the way promotions work here. There aren't any real paths up. You either stay in housekeeping or leave." Franklin nodded, listening. "I've been here 2 years," she continued. "I trained 4 new hires. I've covered weekends, doubles, holidays. Never got offered anything higher than lead cleaner for an extra $1. But I've seen guys from front desk get promoted to supervisor in under 6 months. Who made those decisions? Darren. Always Darren. Said front desk was more visible to guests, told me housekeeping wasn't leadership material." Franklin stopped walking. "He said that to your face? Twice. And to another girl, too. She quit last fall." Franklin's expression hardened. "We'll be reviewing every promotion decision he made." Briella shook her head slowly. "It's not just about undoing what he did, it's about building something different. If you want people to stay, they have to believe they can grow." "I agree," he said. "Would you be open to moving into training once you're medically cleared?" She blinked. "Me, you've already been doing it unofficially. We'd formalize it, make sure you're compensated. You'd have input on how new hires are brought in and how performance is tracked." Briella didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yeah, I'd do that." They returned to the main floor just as Elaine stepped out of the office. "I need you," she said to Franklin. "Now." He followed her down the hallway to room 217, where the door was propped open. Inside, one of the newer housekeepers, Shanice, a soft-spoken woman in her early 20s, was standing by the bed, arms folded tightly over her chest. Across from her, another employee, a tall man in a maintenance shirt, stood with his back to the window. Elaine stepped between them. "What's going on?" Shanice's voice was low but shaking. "He said I looked too ghetto to be talking to guests. I was just asking if he could check the AC, and he started laughing." Franklin turned to the man. "Is that accurate?" The man, whose name tag read Jesse, didn't look up. "It was a joke." Elaine's tone cut in cold and immediate. "You think that's funny?" "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. Franklin stepped forward. "You're done here." Jesse looked up. "What? You made a derogatory comment based on appearance. That's discrimination. There's no discussion." He tried to protest, but Elaine was already on the phone, calling in the HR liaison from corporate. Jesse was escorted off the property within the hour. Shanice remained quiet afterward, but as she passed Franklin in the hallway later, she gave a small nod. Not gratitude exactly, more like acknowledgement. By noon, Elaine had initiated one-on-one reviews. Franklin sat in on several, listening carefully. Tanya from laundry mentioned that she hadn't had a full day off in almost 3 weeks. "They kept calling me in," she said. "Said the sheets wouldn't fold themselves." Elaine scribbled notes. "Were those requests or demands?" "Requests that felt like threats," Tanya answered. "If I said no, I'd lose hours the next week." Franklin didn't have to ask who orchestrated that. It was clear Darren's influence had been deeper than he realized. It wasn't just bad decisions, it was a culture built on fear. Over the next few hours, Franklin met with 3 more employees. Each had a different story, but one theme kept surfacing. Silence had been survival. Speaking up meant losing hours, shifts, or respect. At 3 in the afternoon, he stepped outside to get air. The parking lot was half full, the sky overcast. He stood by the loading dock, hands in his pockets, thinking about how far the reality had drifted from the company he thought he'd built. Lane joined him a few minutes later. "You sure you want to keep this location open?" she asked. He looked at her. "You think we should shut it down?" "Not necessarily, but it's not a staffing problem, it's a values problem." What happened here wasn't a fluke, it was allowed. Encouraged even. I know. You rebuild this place, you'll have to start from the foundation, no patchwork. Then that's what we'll do, she nodded. We'll need a permanent GM who gets it, not someone looking to hit metrics. I have someone in mind. Who? He didn't answer right away. That evening, Franklin called Briella into the office. You asked about growth, he said. There's a bigger opportunity. She frowned. I thought we were talking training, we still are, but also, I want you to consider applying for assistant manager. You'd be working directly under Elaine for now. If it works out, you'd eventually run this place. Her face didn't change immediately. She just stared at him like she was waiting for the catch. I don't have a degree, she said. You have experience and judgment. That's what matters here. She sat back slowly in the chair, eyes scanning the desk, then the window. You really want someone like me in charge? Yes, he said, because you never forgot what it's like to be on the floor. She nodded once slowly but with finality. Then I'll do it. Franklin stood, extended his hand. She shook it firm and steady as the sun dropped behind the hotel's rooftop, casting long shadows across the lot. Franklin knew it wasn't fixed, not even close. But for the first time in months, the place felt like it had a future. A real one. 3 weeks later, Franklin stood quietly in the back corner of the hotel's small meeting room, arms folded, listening as Elaine led the morning briefing. The energy in the room was different, still cautious, but steadier. The staff had shrunk slightly during the transition, with 2 voluntary departures and 1 quiet dismissal after Elaine discovered persistent tardiness and falsified time cards. But the remaining team had started to build something that resembled trust, brick by brick. We've got 3 interviews lined up today for housekeeping, Elaine said, her tone even. 2 referrals and 1 from the hiring board. If they show up and pass the background check, we'll start training by next week. Tanya raised her hand. Will they be full-time or floating? Floaters at first, Elaine replied. If they're consistent, we'll move them up, but coverage comes first. Franklin watched Briella, now in her new maroon collared shirt, jot notes in a small notebook. She didn't speak unless something needed clarification, and she didn't linger after meetings ended. She'd already shadowed Elaine for 10 shifts, and while her posture was still guarded, she'd started walking the halls with more purpose. After the meeting, Franklin followed her into the supply room. She was checking inventory against a clipboard, scanning a shelf of linens. You're keeping detailed logs now? He asked. Trying to track where we run short, she said, not looking up. We've got enough towels, but we're low on small soaps again. Vendor says our usage is too high. I told him to come walk a hallway during checkouts. Franklin stepped closer. You always this direct, Briella shrugged. I don't pretend things are fine when they're not. I think we've had enough of that. He nodded, then paused. You thinking about staying long-term? She finally looked at him. Depends. On what? Whether this is real or temporary. I've seen people smile during audits and then go right back to ignoring us once corporate leaves. I'm not leaving, Franklin said. Not for a while. She studied him for a second, then returned her attention to the clipboard. Then I guess we'll see. Downstairs, Lionel was finishing up his 3rd shift in a row. Elaine had approved his request for a 2nd weekend clerk, but the new hire had called off his first scheduled day. Franklin caught him just as he was wrapping up receipts at the front desk. You look like you've been hit by a truck, Franklin said. Feels about right, Lionel replied. But hey, no overnight emergencies this time. Still too many hours, though. Yeah, but at least now I know there's someone listening. Franklin nodded. Go home, sleep, and if the new guy flakes again, I'll cover your shift myself. Lionel blinked. Seriously, I've cleaned rooms. I can check in a guest. The younger man gave a tired laugh. All right, I'll hold you to that. By midday, the hotel's rhythm had settled into its usual pattern. Guests departed in bursts, housekeeping moved between floors in pairs, and Tanya ran laundry with her new part-time assistant, a quiet woman named Kendra who'd previously worked at her retirement home. Kendra didn't talk much, but she worked fast and kept to her schedule. Tanya had already filed a note requesting they keep her on after the initial 30-day trial. In the afternoon, Franklin sat down with Elaine to review the upcoming budget adjustments. The numbers were tight. Raising wages and repairing equipment had cut into margins, but guest satisfaction scores had begun to climb sharply. The most recent report showed a 32% drop in complaints and a noticeable uptick in repeat bookings. "We're stabilizing," Elaine said, "but it's a narrow path. One bad month and we're bleeding. I'll absorb the hit if it means we're building something sustainable." "You sure?" "I should have done it years ago." Elaine closed the report. "You know, I've worked with a lot of owners. Most chase numbers. You're the first one I've seen mop a lobby." Franklin leaned back. "It's easy to forget how far removed we get. I didn't start this company to be rich. I started it because I thought I could do it better than the guy who once fired me for missing a shift to take my mother to chemo." Elaine didn't respond to that. She just nodded once, then went back to her notes. That evening, Franklin made one final round of the building. The hallway carpets were cleaner than they had been in weeks. The vending machine had been restocked. The A/C unit in room 217 had been replaced. Every change had taken work calls, approvals, reallocation of funds, but they were real. He found Briella on the third floor near the fire exit, checking the linen cart. "You ever think about what's next?" he asked. She looked up. "What do you mean, you've stepped up? You've handled scheduling, training, even conflict resolution. You've earned more than just this building." She hesitated. "You trying to move me already, eventually?" "Not yet. But I want to build a leadership track for internal staff. Real growth, not just the occasional promotion when someone quits. I need people who have lived it. Who don't lead from a distance." She leaned against the cart. "And you think I'm one of them?" "I know you are." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down the hallway toward the last room on the left. "I used to clean that one last, always had the worst stains." "I hated it." Franklin smiled faintly. "You still hate it?" "I haven't touched a vacuum in 3 weeks," she said, "but I still remember the worst ones." He nodded. "That's what makes you the right person, you remember." She didn't smile, but her voice was lighter now. "All right. Let's see where this goes." The next morning, Franklin met with the regional operations team via video call. He gave a full account of what had happened at the Indianapolis location. "No spin, no padding, just facts. We failed," he told them. "And it wasn't because of outside pressure. It was because we stopped paying attention. That ends now." He laid out a new directive: mandatory quarterly walk-throughs by senior leadership, anonymous staff feedback forums at every location, and a new protocol for incident escalation that bypassed local management if necessary. He ended the call with a final instruction: "Send me the full list of properties. I'll be visiting everyone." That afternoon, he packed up his laptop and stepped outside. The late spring air was sharp with the smell of fresh pavement. A delivery truck was pulling in to drop off new bedding supplies. A guest walked by with a suitcase, nodded politely. As Franklin walked across the lot to his rental car, he paused and looked back at the building. The sign out front flickered slightly, an old wiring issue they'd scheduled to fix next week. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't pretending either. And that was enough for now.